crushing enemy terminators, right? They usually just end up in a sort of contesting zone. And it's that last turn or so scramble that you do where you go, maybe my terminators can hold an objective, right? But otherwise, you really relied on tactical. G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today we're going to be looking at this Heresy Roundtable Refreshing the Rules article. I did have another video I was going to be putting up instead, but this one is too interesting for me to sort of delay. So, as you read through it, a big point they keep sort of reiterating on is there won't be here that changes much about how your current army works. They'll say that, it's not a completely new set of principles and ideas. It's just cool new elements, things like that. And I think we all know that at this point that whether or not the edition is good or bad is irrelevant, but we can all agree there is actually a lot of change. Now, people who want to argue certain semantics seem to just say that, there's still an assault phase, there's still a shooting phase, there's still a movement phase. It's not really that changed. Okay, sure. If I were to come to their house and I was to, take their car and swap it to a completely different car, you can't just say, well, it's still a car, right? It's still the same thing. There's no difference between your car and this car, especially if you have a nice, big, expensive car and I replace it with a crappy little 1980s hatchback. No, I shouldn't say that. 1980s hatchbacks rock. We can all be pretty certain that there is a lot here that has changed. And I think it's disingenuous to pretend otherwise, that there is not a lot of change going on in the edition. It's also very interesting to see that they spend a lot of time talking about how they've improved things by condensing them down, and they've improved things by adding more. So, an example of this, they mention how leadership is now covering, was used to cover all these things, and now they've, expanded upon it. So now you've got these other forms of leadership type thing. You've got intelligence, you've got willpower, you've got cool. Okay. But then at the same time, they go along and say that, we got rid of certain effects, such as blind and things like that, in favor of these status effects, pinned and suppressed and stunned and routed, which I'm personally fine with. But the logic here is that they said they were overlapping small rules, pinning, blind, concussive, they all articulate the same concept. So we boiled them down into these statuses. Yeah, but that's why cool, intelligence, willpower, and leadership were boiled down back after Rogue Trader, because they basically embody the same concept. This is an oxymoron. It's a contradictory statement. You're saying, here we have a whole bunch of rules that exist in our system, and we've decided that if, we could condense these rules down, and really we can just make a single rule that covers the core concept of what all these different things are trying to say. And then you took another rule and you said, hey, let's cut this one up into 4 different pieces. And, part of the reason, if you go back and you listen to the old interviews with the staff about, why they got rid of cool and willpower and intelligence in the first place, was because they said, well, functionally, they were the same value most of the time. A Marine usually had a similar intelligence, willpower, and, cool stat to their leadership. If their leadership was 8, typically those were 8 values as well. And they said, well, if they're the same value, why would I have them different? They need to be dramatically different values for completely different mechanics, and they're not. So they condensed it down to leadership, and they said, look, it is all different forms of leadership. It is your willpower. That is a form of your leadership ability. Your morale, essentially, is what it is. It's called the morale phase. Leadership is just the single name they decided to give that particular phase, because WP or something like that probably doesn't read as well compared to LD. I don't know. Maybe people get it confused with weapon skill, but that's what they chose 40 years ago as the solution to the problem. So, on the one hand, they giveth, on the other, they taketh. And this is the weird sticking point, you see. I don't think the people working on this edition truly understand what the Horus Heresy player's mindset is. A Horus Heresy player, in my opinion, they tend to like a slow burn of a system. They like a system where they can come in, they can plan out an army, and they know that they've got years to work on this army to slowly grow it from nothing into something, usually a major something. This can be because of prohibitive costs. It can be because Games Workshop's own store is, eternally and perpetually out of stock. That's its own problem. It could be because they don't have enough time. They've got a wife, they've got kids, they're more attracted to this game because it's a nostalgic niche for them. It reminds them of their youth playing these sort of games, whatever the reason may be. But when it comes to people playing the Horus Heresy, these are considerations. And when you turn the game into something like a 3-year cycle, then you're now condensing down that time period where it's like, okay, now you can buy your books, and now you got to, start building your army, and, we're going to invalidate it in, let's see, 2 years and 6 months. We're going to stop support for this. Like, when did they stop support for this edition? About 8 months ago. So maybe 9 months ago, really. They just released that last book, but they'd stopped FAQs over a year and a half ago, 18 months ago plus. So, if you're looking at that, you're going, really, halfway through this edition, support is going to functionally end? Potentially? Like, you might say that, no, this is a one-time 3-year cycle of the Horus Heresy, this is going to be a great edition, they don't change it. Unfortunately, we don't know. You see, the biggest predictor for actions going forward is actions that have already occurred. If you know someone, they're a perpetual liar, you're going to treat what they say in future as probably a lie. Conversely, if you know someone who is of high integrity, they're always telling you the truth, you're going to likely believe them, no matter how sort of ludicrous what they say is, because they've established that behavior with you. Well, it's the same sort of thing with Games Workshop. Yes, you might say this could be an excellent edition, it's going to have 10 years of support, but they have shown themselves to be doing 3 years with all of their mainline systems. And Horus Heresy is treated as a mainline system and has just had a 3-yearly box reveal. In addition to this, they're changing things and they're gaslighting the players, which is a very rude way of doing it. When they say there won't be much that changes how your current army works, you just might need another Centurion for the new Force Org, but that's about it. But that's not true. We know that they're removing things like power weapons from Terminators. We know that they're removing a whole bunch of units. Do you like bike command squads? You're probably not going to have them this edition, if all the leaks that have come out are to be believed. And these are problems, because you're telling people, on the one hand, there are very few changes, and then they see, well, no, actually, there's a lot of changes. Then you tell them, no, we're simplifying the rules and making it better. And then you also say, it's a longer, more complex and narrative-themed war game. And then you say, hey, we're getting rid of a bunch of war gear and equipment. You see, the contradictory statements all the time kill people's faith in a system. As I said, I don't think they understand what a Horus Heresy player likes. In addition to this, a lot of people have an additional problem with that 3-year churn and burn, which is many of them never got to play their faction. And this is something that is big for my own rewrite of the Horus Heresy game system, Circle Edition as I'm calling it currently, until I can think of a better name. And that is that, well, you need to sort of have all your factions, your mainline ones, ready to go from day one. So I know that people want to play their Black Shields, they want to play their Shattered Legions, they want to play their Militia and their Demons of the Ruin Storm the minute that the system drops. They don't want to be stuck in this loop of, okay, well, you're not playing your Black Shields for 3 months at least, until we might release a PDF for them. But, Legiones Astartes or Legiones Hereticus are ready to go. So, well, just build a Sons of Horus army or something in the meantime. They don't want that. And if you're doing things like they did with 2.0, where it's like, oh, yeah, well, we're going to wait 2 years into the 3-year lifespan and we're going to drop Beta Garmin, And that's going to have your Black Shields rules. And people go, oh, great, now I've got my Black Shields rules. Oh, all right, I'll start building an army for it. And then 6 months after they start building their army, they go, hang on a minute. They just announced another edition's coming along. Huh. Oh, there's no FAQ for the book I just bought that I spent $100 on. Huh. You see, that is not stuff that typically will cause your player base, your community, to really appreciate the work that you're doing as a company. So again, you are lying to your community, you're gaslighting them. You're telling them that what they are seeing with their own eyes is not true. Now, none of this is for me to say the game is going to be bad or the game is going to be good. I'm not trying to lead you down that path, even if I do come across that way. What I'm trying to point out is this is where the divide comes from. If you're wondering why people are looking at this and they're not anywhere near as captured as they are with 2.0, these are the reasons. 2.0 is 10 years after Horus Heresy first launches. That's a good time to build up a player base. It's a long time to spend with an edition, and that edition also hadn't been FAQ'd very well or in a while. So that meant at the end of Heresy 1's lifespan, especially with COVID and all of that along the way, people were coming out of it going, hey, you know what? I have had enough, I think, of this edition and this style of gameplay. Let's try something different. Oh, a bunch of it's going to Plastic Heresy? Awesome, even better. I'm on board. Hey, you're not creating all these random new units for the game, like Sat-9 Terminators and Sat-9 Dreadnoughts that don't really seem to fit in anywhere. Sure, I'll jump on board this train. You're just giving me new versions of things like Mark 6. Okay, I think I prefer Mark 2, but Mark 6 will do. And then they get it, and then they go, you know what, we're pretty happy. And you get good buy-in into the system. But then you let them down because you don't support the system. You treat it as a sort of abandonware. You have released the product, and you go, you know what, I know I said I was going to support this edition, but over here is a new edition I can write. And that's very much what I see in here. I see a development team that is talking about the things they wanted to see. They expect to see more use of niche consoles and characters as opposed to a single Praetor who could do everything on his own. That's not what happened in 2.0 or 1.0. Yes, people took a single Praetor, but that's because you could only take one Praetor per X amount of points. And the reason they did so was because the Praetor provided a lot of utility. But I can assure you, people usually used all 3 HQ slots. And if they had more, they probably would have used those too. But forcing them to use those HQ slots, like the new Force Organization chart does, I think is a misstep. I think it is great for systems like Epic, that sort of style, so Legions Imperialis. But again, I think it misunderstands what your Heresy players want. What they want, in my opinion, and you can feel free to call me out in the comments below, I'm not immune to being called out on my own behavior, but I think from everything I've witnessed, people want a sandbox they can have fun in. That means having things like our current Force Organization chart, where you open it up and you say, hey, these are all the things you can pick from. Have at it, okay? And we're going to give you things like Rights of War. And what Rights of War, as opposed to tactical gambits in this new system, are going to do is they're going to give you a list of restrictions, and these arbitrary restrictions and these quote-unquote buffs are going to dramatically change the way that you play the game, okay? And because of the way these dramatically change your game, you yourself are now challenging yourself mentally when you do your list construction. Hey, yeah, I'm going to gain, Terminators as troops. I'm playing Pride of the Legion. But I'm also going to be hemorrhaging victory points every time I lose these squads, for example. Heresy 1.0 version of that Rite of War. And so people immediately have a carrot and stick situation going on with their Rights of War. And it was entirely optional to them if they took that Rite of War. And if they did, they knew they were imposing those limitations on themselves. And that was part of the fun, part of the challenge. And it's part of building the theme. If you have an army you really want to build, awesome. Let's build it. And you look at that and you go, yep, I I think I can do a Sigismund proto-Black Templar themed army. I'll take the Templar Brethren Rite of War. I'm going to load up on Templar Brethren, but I know I'm going to struggle with things like Terminator armor because I've only got a lot of power swords here. I don't have the sort of fortifications, heavy support options that you normally would pack into the standard Imperial Fists army because I've sacrificed a bit of that utility in order to go heavy on the Templar theme. People love that sort of way of building armies. But when you turn around to them and say, all right, arbitrarily, all of you, you now must take a Centurion to unlock this. You must take a Centurion to unlock this. You must take a Centurion to unlock this. Then suddenly you start to look at it and go, Games Workshop released like 10 Centurions in the last year. Oh, I wonder if these things are related. Probably has nothing to do with one another, of course. And so, yeah, reading this article on the whole, I don't dislike the writers or anything like that, okay? Not at all. It's very interesting, though, to gain insight, because it really seems like they had their own design vision for the game and that they went in that direction, which is fine. But that's the sort of thing you got to do when you're designing a new game for the first time for a new audience. It's not the sort of thing you do when you have an established franchise, to me. When you have an established franchise, you have to straddle a fine line of change and no change, okay? So when I talk about this, people love change, and people have made comments online. I hate, there's not enough good descriptive words here. So when they're talking online, they'll say things like, there's two things wargamers hate: not changing something and changing something. In a way, it's true, but it takes away all the nuance, okay? People do love change. They love it when you take a mechanic that doesn't work and you fix it. But what they hate is change when you take something that does work and then you mess with it and you make it probably worse because you're messing with it, or you just side grade it. If you're making something a sideways improvement, then you're not improving it. You're just changing the way it's read. And that means you're now forcing people to learn a new way of reading something, but they haven't actually gained anything from doing so. And if there's one thing I've learned from, humans in my brief existence on this mortal coil, it's that people hate being stuffed around. And that's what that is. It's being stuffed around because people are going, well, I've not gained anything from undertaking this task. You've just made things harder for me. And harder is not enjoyable. And we're very, very funny, simple creatures like that, aren't we? And that's the way I look at a lot of the moves here. You've not made it better, you've made it just different. Okay? And, they talk about how, tactical squads were always compulsory force org, but they didn't do much beforehand. Now they're a key part of your army due to objective. Spoilers alert, if you had tactical squads in Heresy 1.0, they were incredibly vital to your army in order to score. Yes, you could get things like objectives secured on certain units. You could have Terminators that could hold down objectives. You had units like tactical support squads. They could also hold objectives. Sure, yes, these things existed. But it's very hard to have your Terminators hold down objectives when you're also relying on them to be your beat sticks crushing enemy Terminators, right? They usually just end up in a sort of contesting zone. And it's that last turn or so scramble that you do where you go, maybe my Terminators can hold an objective, right? But otherwise, you really relied on tactical and tactical support squads to do your primary objective holding in Heresy 1. In Heresy 2, you strip that away from them because you made the objective missions secondary to kill points missions. So a core game mechanic in the rulebook is what changed how tactical squads actually performed on the battlefield. But tactical squads themselves had plenty of utility still, because they could absolutely hose people with bolt gun fire. You could fire literally hundreds of shots in a game if you played your tacticals that way. Some legions, like Imperial Fists, if they were constantly pulling off Fury of the Legion on enemies getting close, it was a disgusting amount of firepower they could put out. Tactical squads are very handy in 2.0. They just aren't handy as objective scorers because so little weight is placed upon it. Unless you play the horrible 4-turn Siege of Cathonia might have no attention span missions. And then they double down on that in 3.0 where they're like, yeah, no, they're all 4-turn missions now. So, do you ever think maybe people really enjoy playing their games and they like having the ability to play longer games without house ruling it? You know, Heresy 1 had things like, hey, when you hit random game length and you're going up against Iron Warriors, you can choose to screw over the Iron Warriors player, because this is one of the limitations of them, and you can force the game to play an extra turn. If you force the game to play an extra turn, that might give you a chance to win a game that was unwinnable. And what they thought they had wrapped up with rolling their random game length. That's an awesome mechanic, because it's now taken something and completely turned on its head due to a limitation of that faction. And that was a trade-off that players made for picking that faction. They went, oh shit, well, I didn't expect that. Okay. I set myself up to, be on all these objectives, and I didn't go into that close combat because I wanted to hold the objective, aiming for the game to end, and it didn't end. Now you're going to be able to charge me and capture the objectives off me. Oh, I've made a major mistake here, right? So you had to play your hand very wisely in Heresy 1. Awesome. Very narrative, right? Because that's what happens in real life. Sometimes generals, they overextend or they underextend, and then that gets exploited by the general on the opposite side of the battlefield. And in Heresy 2.0, they stripped that away. In Heresy 3.0, they're doubling down on that. Again, I don't think they understand what the Heresy player really wants out of an edition. And so I made some rules for myself with my own edition with that in mind. And these are rules I think that the writers at Games Workshop should really be applying themselves, which is you can't change the current system too much. That's rule number 1. You can't change the current system too much. Okay? Rule number 2, but in my head it's rule number 1. Everyone needs to have fun. Okay? And that means that all your factions have to be as good against one another. It has to be no rock, paper, scissory. This is the Legion, and it's going to be the best. Like right now, it's shaping up to be Raven Guard. They're going to be really bloody good this edition, for example. Can't hit them over 18 inches. They're just going to be constantly stealthed and shrouded. Like, good luck, they're going to be very resilient. If you've got rule number 1 being you can't change it too much from the established mechanics, then rule number 2 being that, everyone has to have fun. I'd say rule number 3 is everyone needs to be playable straight away. If you can have 40k with all the myriad of 40k armies, and when a new edition drops, all of the factions are playable day 1, it should be the same with Horus Heresy, because there are far less factions. Okay, sub-factions wise, yeah, there's a few, but if you look at the primary factions, it's really just what? Marines, you've got Militia, you've got Auxilia, you've got Demons the Ruin Storm, you've got the Custodes, you've got the Talons of the Emperors in the Sisters of Silence factions, and you've got Knight Households, and you've got Mechanicum. It's 8 factions. And then they can all be broken down further. But the rules for your Shattered Legions, well, if you've written 18 legions, is it really hard to add 2 more in the form of Shattered Legion rules and Black Shield's rules on day 1? I don't think it is too much to ask for. This is not an edition which is springing out of nowhere like Heresy 1 was, where it takes time to put all the building blocks in place and come out with your Black Shields and your Shattered Legions. No, they exist now, they're established, you know what the mechanics are, you know how those factions should function, so now you just have to replicate that in the next edition. And I see this more and more as I'm writing the Circle edition of the game, and I see, hey, I'm one person, but I can knock out most of the rulebook in a couple of days, and I'm a single person who's just doing this for a couple of hours each night after work. There is a full company, an organization whose whole job is predicated around their ability to do this professionally for a living. And all they do is write rules and play them all year round. That is their job. They get paid to do that. That means that I've got a very good understanding now of how much or how little effort is actually going into this from going through the exercise myself. And I've got my concerns, okay? So I'd say those are three big things, right? So recapping again, because I really want to double down this. Can't change the game too much from the established mechanics. You have to make it fun for everyone, and you need all of your factions to be released pretty much at the same time. Also, as a fun little side note, I do want to add Xenos in. But that's a down the line thing. So think 6th, 7th edition 40k, what Eldar, Necrons, that sort of thing looks like. Probably something very similar to that. But it's a down the line thing because it's a bonus add-on to my system. That's not a rule, that's just a thing. The fourth rule is you need to look at what is not working and do your feedback in a timely manner. Should be do your feedback, should be respond to the feedback. So, for example, I don't expect them to get told on day one, Dreadnoughts are broken, and then on day two, an FAQ comes out, because that will get very tedious the minute everyone makes a complaint. But I do expect that every 6 months, some form of FAQ comes out to go, yep, these are X, Y, and Z are the main issues identified so far by the community. We're going to jump on it and we're going to fix it. The last thing you want is a Heresy 2.0 situation where you get told, no, Dreadnoughts are broken, and they go, cool, we're going to do nothing in the entire life cycle of the game system, and we might fix it next edition by nerfing what is strong and building up what is bad. And it's just, it's a complete, it's making a statue and then destroying it with a sledgehammer because it has an imperfection. It's a silly way of doing things, okay? So it has to be avoided. So I'd say it's another core rule. Another core rule, number 5, would be the life cycle needs to be a longer life cycle, at least 5 years, preferably 7 years for an edition. Now, where that may conflict with the bottom line of the company is a different matter. But this is where the ability to, essentially milk your customers by other means comes in. You shouldn't be relying on trashing your system's rules and then coming up with a solution to the problems you've created to create financial gain for your organization. You should be doing a really good job of writing your rules in the first place and then making a system that's so popular that people just flock to it and buy stuff regardless. Because just because you've come up with new books for a system doesn't mean people are buying more for that system. They didn't suddenly have more money just because you decided to release more rules. People only have so much money they can spend. And if they're spending it on rules, they're not spending it on models. If you do a really good job of the system and you make it so that they want to play all the different factions, that is better in the long run than trying to milk them for models milk them for rules for their models, I should say, every couple of years. I think this is really key, and this is where Games Workshop screws up monumentally for me. Rather than looking at the edition and going, okay, what do people really, really like about this? Let's double down on it. They instead go out of their way to just throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, hey, there's a new edition now. I guess you have to buy that, right? Like, give us money. I like money, right? And it's like, well, no. So many people go, you know what? I love Imperial Fists. I love Raven Guard. Oh, I really like Iron Hands. I want to build all these armies. And then you give them a 3-year lifespan. They're like, oh, I got around to one of them. I made one decent 3,500 point Imperial Fist army, but I never got around to those Iron Hands, those Raven Guard. And, well, frankly, the Raven Guard rules weren't very good, so I wasn't really encouraged to go that way. And it didn't seem like they were doing anything to try and fix that. So, I don't know, I kind of just, maybe the next edition will be better. All right, and then they buy the new rulebook. That's not a great place to be. Where I think you want to be is, hey, you know what? This edition, like Heresy 1, I got to do, Death Guard, Raven Guard, Thousand Suns, White Scars, Iron Hands, as well as smaller forces for Word Bearers, for Night Lords, for then I started going into 2.0. I had Raven Guard again. I then did Salamanders and Iron Warriors and some Emperor's Children, some Blood Angels, some Iron Hands, some Dark Angels, some Word Bearers. It's like I got around at least 15 different factions over the span of the two systems, as well as touching Ruinstorm on the way, Militia armies on the way, Solar Auxiliary armies on the way, a Custodes army on the way. You know, I'm basically on 20. So great, you sold me 20 armies, basically. Most companies would say that's a win. You know, because that's the outer circle. I do a lot of, you know, getting started and reviews and critiques. And I feel you can only do that if you're actually playing the game and using these armies and, you know, or seeing them very regularly. Like if you're constantly playing against World Eaters, like I played Cat and his World Eaters a lot. So I got a really good grasp of how they play and what they're like. Just from playing that person, I didn't have to own it myself. But owning 20 different factions myself makes me really good at understanding, I feel, the system. And I don't think the same is true over at the company. But yeah. Anyway, I'm starting to wander in circles and drone on. So I'm going to cut it away there. But please, leave me your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. Do you think they actually understand the Heresy player mindset? Or have they just picked a direction they want to head in? And they're just patting each other on the back as they head that way, talking about what a great job they think they're doing for one another's edition. I think it's the latter, personally. They're going in this direction. They're all going, yeah, we're doing awesome, man. We're doing awesome. And they're building an edition for themselves. They're building a rod for their own back. I'm not against that approach, I'll just say. But I think your responsibility as people who are writing a system for essentially a profitable enterprise for a company, your goal should be to create the best system you can for the people who are playing that system based on what their wants and expectations are, not on what your personal proclivities may be. If you are putting your personal needs first, well, you're like most of our politicians today, right? You're not doing the job you were put there for. I'm back with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.